Peace and blessings, people. Welcome back to the channel once again. If you have not hit the subscribe and the notification button, make sure you do. That way, when great content like this comes out in the future, you'll be the first to be notified. Now, today's topic is essential, especially when it comes to health and healing, because we're always talking about using food as medicine, but what we forget to talk about is how food today can also be a poison. And I always inscribe a lot of times in my book, food could either be the highest form of healing or the deadliest form of poisoning, depending on the choices of food that you make. And the reason why that has come a big topic today, especially, is because over the last 60 plus years, our food industry and the foods that are available today have shifted and changed so much. It's nothing like our grandparents and great grandparents ate back in the days. If you go back 60 plus years ago, most people didn't necessarily have a refrigerator, in their homes. It didn't become popular until the 1960s. Another really shifted differences 60 plus years ago, our great grandparents would walk into a market and everything would be fresh, or they would grab their food literally from next door or from their garden. Okay, so there wasn't no organic section in the store. There wasn't like an option. Everything was organic. And if you walk into a supermarket today, 80%, 80 to 90% of the supermarket is things that are in box, bag, cans, bags, etc., on the shelf with expiration date and loaded with food chemicals. So it's so important to understand that the way that we eat today has shifted. Genetically modified foods didn't come into play until the 1990s, and they didn't really spill out on the scene until the early 2000s. Everything has shifted in our food supply. And because it has shifted so much in our food supply, this is why what we eat today is so dangerous as compared to our great grandparents. I say it all the time. We're comparing ourselves to our great grandparents who maybe grew up smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, but they ate organically. Every day, everything they ate was organic and everything they ate was fresh, okay? Because back in the day even when you wanted meat, you had to go to the butcher to get it. 60 plus years ago, there was no supermarkets you can walk into and there'd be this huge display of like red meats just laid out looking all perfect. It didn't exist. And so a lot has changed. And as a result of that, those changes, unfortunately, this is why we're so sick today. Most of the chronic illnesses that we have today can be attributed to, unfortunately, us eating a diet that is inconsistent with our biology, eating a diet that is so disagreeable with our biology, it cannot even be broken down to be processed out. Okay, so we end up being constipated. And so what I'm gonna do today is dive into some of the most common toxins or dangerous toxins that are in the food supply today. And the reason why I think this is so important is because most people aren't reading their food labels. And those labels are there for a reason. And most people will look at the front of the label and it'll say all natural, which means absolutely nothing, okay? It means something to you, but it means nothing to them because it's not regulated, okay? And so we're looking at the front of the label, which is where all the hype is, but the real information is on the back of the label. And people will avoid that. But even those who do take the opportunity to look at the back of the label, the unfortunate thing is, most of it sounds like chemistry, okay? Most of it sounds like chemistry. So as a result, you don't even know what it is anyway. You'll commonly find, parabens in food today, nitrates, which we'll talk about later, theobromine, food additives, artificial colors, dyes, red number 40, yellow number 5. Red number 40 is banned in Europe. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that America's food is banned in all of the European countries, Japan, and even China, where a large portion of our food is actually created in China and imported here. They don't even allow their citizens to eat our food, okay? And when you see an American company in a foreign country, what you'll notice is that when you compare the two food labels, the one that was made here in the US and then the one that was made in, or shipped to Europe, the ingredients are totally different. All of the things that are harmful that I'm going to talk about today, they've removed them and sent them over to Europe. So we got to ask ourselves, why are the agencies that are designed to protect us, the EPA, the USDA, the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, they're designed to protect us when it comes to food and drugs. They're designed to decide what is going into the drug supply, what is going into the food supply. And you will see recently they approved everything from genetically modified salmon to be on the food market. They just approved cloned meat to be in the food market. And they definitely approved genetically modified versions of, fruits and vegetables. So this is why it's so important that we have this conversation, because I started out my journey changing how I ate, but then after I changed how I was eating, I then had to start to learn how to read food labels, and being a chemist, I understood what many of those things were. And now I'm thinking to myself, well, what's the lifetime of these certain chemicals in my body? Do they go out readily when I start to eat healthy? Many of them do not. So this is why I started, creating my detox, the 14 and the 28-day detox that you see on my website, because it was like, at the end of the day, if these things are bioaccumulating in our bodies, they're also causing our bodies to have a lot of dysfunction. So I thought it was really important to create the detox for myself initially, and then people started seeing me doing my detox, saw the results, and I started sharing it with them. And all of a sudden, I'm noticing that this detox not only works for me, it works for other people. So let's get into those 7. I'm going to share with you 7 common food toxins that are in our food supply that are dangerous to us. Okay, so number one is BPA. Okay, BPA is found quite often in the linings of cans and jars of food, both food and drinking beverage products. Okay, it's commonly found in plastics. And BPA is what is called an endocrine disruptor. Okay, your endocrine system creates hormones. Okay, and these endocrine disruptors, BPA, they will disrupt your endocrine system and cause hormonal imbalances. This is why you're starting to see exponential growth in cancers in both women and men, because these products, these byproducts, BPA, is ubiquitous in everything we purchase when we go to the supermarket, because everything we purchase in cans and plastics contain BPA. And sometimes it will say BPA free, but the companies have gotten smart. So they removed the BPA, but they create an equivalent chemical called BPS. Okay, so it is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. But when you're buying things in cans and plastics, which when you start to go to the supermarket, you'll notice that everything is either in a can or plastic. This is how it's also contributing to your hormonal balance being disrupted, okay? And the unfortunate thing is it's causing estrogen dominance in women and causing hormonal imbalance also in men. And this can lead to several different types of cancer, okay? And so this is also why you're seeing that spike in cancer. Cancer is about to become the #1 cause of death, okay? When you go back, maybe 60 years ago, it wasn't even in the top 5. Okay, so that's really important to understand. As our food supply change so much, cancers start to peak and go up as well too. Okay, so that's really important. So BPA, #1. #2, mercury, heavy metals. Seeing a lot of heavy metals also in foods, especially things like fish. Okay. Fish is being inundated with a lot of mercury because a lot of mercury is being poured out into the fresh waters and also into the ocean. And the fish are bioaccumulating this mercury, okay? I'll give you a really interesting story. So I had a colleague that was going to the doctors trying to figure out what was going on with her. I mean, she started to have, mental, cognitive effects where she was getting depressed, having anxiety. She noticed that she had some nervous system issues. She was having headaches all the time. She started to have gut issues, a lot of allergies. And the doctors were testing her for everything. They could not figure out what it is. They were putting her on all different types of medication. None of that worked either. Finally, she reaches out to me. And as we're going through, the evaluation, and I'm asking you all these questions like, what shifted in your diet in the last couple of years? How many bowel movements are you having? How much water are you drinking? How much movement are you getting in? What type of work do you do? What type of cosmetic and hygiene products do you use? I'm asking her all these questions. And then finally, I ask her, because we're on like a Zoom. I said, can you open your mouth for me? She opens her mouth and she has like 12 of the amalgam mercury fillings in. And then she tells me that she's on a pescatarian diet. So instantly I think to myself, mercury. And so I said, okay, next time go into your doctor and get a test for mercury. Come to find out her levels are so toxic with mercury, like they're surprised that she's still alive. It was that high. And so we put her on a diet that got rid of a lot of the mercury, put her on the detox. And in just a few months, 3 months, many of the symptoms resolve. Okay, so heavy metals is a big issue. We saw what happened in Flint, Michigan, where there was lead in the municipal or tap water. But here's what people don't realize: Flint, Michigan isn't an isolated incident. And what I mean by that is that lead was coming from the piping, from the city. And so what's important to understand about that is that the plumbing, the piping that was put in for most cities 100 years ago, it's the same piping and plumbing that was put in 100 years ago for most cities. And most of it includes piping that has lead in it. So Flint, Michigan is not an isolated incident. So again, that's another case where you'll see, another heavy metal, affecting people. In that population, you saw, young kids not developing properly, having cognitive issues, people even developing certain types of cancer. So it's really important to understand that even mercury is in our food supply and other heavy metals as well too. And that's the really good thing about, certain herbs remove heavy metals from the body. Eating healthy is great. It's the foundation of health. But I always tell people, food is medicine in regards to prevention. Okay, it nourishes the body. That's the primary objective of food. But herbs actually help to remove certain heavy metals from the body. So that was, again, like when I was creating my detox, that was the thinking behind it. How do I get the heavy metals out? All right. So number 3, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. The unfortunate thing again here is that, if you go back 70 years ago, many of the pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, fungicides, etc., that were being used for farmers were natural, okay? And then you had this boom and creation of all of these agrochemical companies, and they started to make the synthetic versions of these natural products that have been used for hundreds of years with farmers. And the more and more these agrochemical companies got involved, the more and more it got more man-made, the more and more it got more synthetic, and the more and more it got more deadly. And as a result, these pesticides, which are designed to kill pests, these herbicides that are designed to kill weeds, these insecticides that are designed to kill, insects, and these fungicides that are designed to kill certain yeast or candida or funguses. Now, unfortunately, they're not only dangerous to the insects, the pests, and the fungus. Now they're dangerous to us too. Initially the insecticides were designed to increase the estrogen in the body to take out the reproductive process. So now these, insects don't multiply. Well, now they're affecting our hormonal systems. Okay, and the unfortunate consequence of that is that, again, agrochemical companies think in a chemical mindset. They don't think in a health and a healing mindset. And so all they're thinking about is get rid of the bugs, get rid of the pests. They're not necessarily thinking at all about what are the consequences of when I put this on the food and it absorbs into the food, what does that do to the customer's health? So pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides are really a huge problem when it comes to our health too, because we're consuming so many things that contain them. And so one of the tips I'll give you is that there is a dirty dozen, which is 12 of the most sprayed plants that you should definitely always buy organic. And then there's Clean 15 by the Environmental Work Group that you don't necessarily have to buy organic because they don't spray them as much. But in my opinion, because I'm a farmer and you know, all of the fruit that we have at iHeart Fruit Box, all of the fruit are A, grown organically, B, seeded, and seasonal. Okay, so we don't grow things that aren't within its natural season. We grow only things that have a seed in it, and then we make sure it's grown organically. Okay, so most farmers cannot attest to that today. And so that prevents us from giving not only ourselves, because I eat everything we grow, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides, but it also prevents our customers from being affected by that as well too, okay? Number 4 is BHT. BHT is butylated hydroxytoluene, okay? You're gonna find it in chewing gum. You're gonna find it in animal feed, what they feed the animals, meat, and dried food products primarily, and it's used as a preservative. But here's the thing, it preserves the food, but it does not preserve you, okay? And that's really, really important. It's very dangerous to our health, okay? Number 5, okay? We're gonna move on to number 5. Number 5 is recombinant bovine growth hormone, okay? Or RBGH, okay? This is something that they commonly inject into cows to essentially make them produce more milk, okay? To increase the production of milk for dairy cows. Now, here's the important thing that I want you to know. Whatever you put in an animal, and if you consume animal products, guess what? You're consuming whatever it consumes. So, as I was saying earlier, with the previous example, with the BHT, they put this in animal feed, okay? So when you eat, when the animal eats it, you're also eating it because the food that we eat becomes who we are, okay? And that goes back to the old saying, you are what you eat. That's why when you're a 6-pound baby and you're being fed, you grow. You grow because of the food you're eating is becoming cells and tissues and organ systems, and it's making you grow and expand as a human being. So we truly are what we eat. So if we truly are what we eat, and if you don't feed cows what they're supposed to be eating, which is grass, and you feed them genetically modified soy and corn, which is what they're fed, and you put these chemicals like BHT in it, butylated hydroxytoluene, and then on top of that, you inject the cow now with this recombinant bovine growth hormone, and you're feeding that cow antibiotics to prevent it from getting sick. But we all know that antibiotics make you grow. It makes you add weight to your body because it disrupts the microbiome as well. And so as you're accumulating these things, you have to look at the total effect, okay? When these governmental agencies are deciding to allow these type of things in the food supply, they're only thinking about it from the individual aspect, okay? They're not thinking about the totality of all of the chemicals that are being used on these animals, okay? So it's really important to understand. So even if you don't eat, you know, beef, but you eat dairy, or then you're still in the same boat, okay? You drink milk, you eat cheese, yogurt, sour cream, the list goes on and on. You're consuming all of the chemicals that were put into this animal, okay? And what's really important is that you're not only consuming the chemicals that were injected or put into this animal, you're also consuming the hormones that are naturally in a cow, okay? That are designed to keep a cow at 1,000+ pounds, okay? So those hormones are also in your body as well too, all right? Number 6 is sodium nitrates or nitrates. Now, this one is very important because 60 to 70% of the standard American diet is processed. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. 60 to 70% of the standard American diet is processed foods. That means that it's going through a process. And through that process, all of the fiber, all of the nutrients have been pulled out of it. That's why when you get white flour, it is white. It is no longer the original color because everything good has been pulled out of it. Okay? And to pull that out of that food, you need chemicals to do that. Okay? You need chemical solvents. You need different type of chemicals to be able to do that. It's not just a milling process. Okay? They use chemicals to pull these things out. So not only are you pulling the good things out, but you're putting the bad things in. And this is why when you see the packaging for a lot of these things, they will say enrich or enhance with. Okay, there it's enriched because it was poor at some point. It didn't have, it was all of the good was taken out of it, so they had to enrich it. And they don't put what was in it back in it. They put something man-made back in it. So when you see enriched with iron or enriched with vitamin B12 or vitamin D or whatever it is, fiber, it is a man-made version of it. Okay. Now, back to the original point. Sodium nitrates or nitrates are commonly used in processed foods. And the reason why they use them in processed food is because they use them as a preservative and as a food additive. And when they add it to these foods, it prevents the bacteria from breaking down the food. You know that when you buy a loaf of bread or any type of organic or real food, at some point it's supposed to spoil and go bad, right? Well, they use preservatives to preserve the food, but again, it doesn't preserve you. Okay, so sodium nitrates, the unfortunate thing, they're commonly used in deli meats and processed foods. Okay, and here's the unfortunate thing about sodium nitrates. They're listed as a level 1 carcinogen according to the IARC, which is the governing body that determines what is carcinogenic, which means that it determines what is cancerous. And they're listed as a level 1 carcinogen. Level 1 means that it is in the same category with cigarettes, asbestos, and plutonium. Okay, we all know that cigarettes causes 80% of lung cancer. And we know that plutonium, which is radioactive, can give you not only damaged DNA, but definitely give you cancer. Okay, so it's in that same category. This is turkey meat, bacon, these breakfast sausages, hot dogs. I can go on and on. How many of us have either made a sandwich for our kids or had a sandwich made for us going up to take to school or at home with deli turkey meat or bologna or anything? Those are loaded with nitrates, okay? And these nitrates are a level 1 carcinogen. Again, this is why cancer is on the uptick and the uprise when it comes to becoming number 1 in terms of like the number 1 killer of human beings. It's predicted that even by 2030, between 2030 and 2050, it will be the number 1 killer of all Americans. Okay. Now keep in mind, like 60, 70 years ago, it wasn't even in the top 5. So a lot has shifted during this time. Okay. And then number 7. Number 7 is genetically modified organisms or genetically modified foods. And I've talked about them as we've gone through this, but the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, again, genetically modified foods were invented in the 1990s, then approved and entered the food supply in the early 2000s. Okay, so we don't necessarily have a long-standing history with understanding what these foods are going to do to our health long term. Because you have to understand the human body is very resilient. Okay, it figures out a way to not only survive but to live and thrive as much as possible. But here's the thing: over the course of time of bioaccumulating genetically modified materials in your body, bioaccumulating pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, because GMO foods are loaded with pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides like atrazine, which is known to cause cancer, and glyphosate, which is known to cause cancer, okay? They're loaded with these things. So it's not just the food itself, unfortunately, it's also what the food contains as well in terms of what it's been sprayed with. And some of the products that you will commonly see that is ubiquitous in virtually everything. I mean, corn, soy, canola, 90% of soy is genetically modified, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 98% of all corn is genetically modified, okay? And here's the unfortunate thing. Now, when you're looking at food labels today, what you'll notice is if you look really carefully under the ingredients or in the ingredients, it will say contains bioengineered products or organisms, things of that nature. It will actually tell you now because now it has the food label and food companies have to admit that. But when it says bioengineered, it's talking about genetically modified. But they're saying bioengineered because it sounds better, okay? But that means genetically modified. Now, here's the thing, I'll tell you. Most of the foods you're eating contain genetically modified organisms, and even most of the meat you're consuming today. I mentioned earlier that the FDA approved cloned meat. The FDA has approved genetically modified salmon, okay? That's the unfortunate thing. Now we have genetically modified salmon in our population now, okay? Just imagine that you're thinking you're eating healthy, you're thinking you're eating wild caught salmon, and then as a result, what you notice is that you look at the packaging, and then on the packaging it says bioengineered. Okay, and now you got to think, what the hell is bioengineered salmon? And so it's just really important for us to understand that, you know, and when I say this, I don't say it loosely. When you look at what's being allowed in our food supply, you would think that they're trying to poison us. Okay. And this is why I say, again, food could either be the highest form of healing or the deadliest form of poisoning. And so make sure when you're making food choices out there, you are careful when it comes to looking at the ingredient labels as much as possible, understanding where you're sourcing your food from. So I hope that this has been helpful today in terms of like helping you understand how to look at food different, because we have to redefine food today, because if we don't redefine it, what's going to happen is shortly from now, what we're going to notice is that most of our food isn't real. Okay. Bill Gates just bought, I think last year or 2 years ago, bought 242,000 acres of farmland, specifically farmland. And now he followed up with this company called Apeel, Apeel, okay? And when you start to look at what they're doing to the food, you understand why he's getting into food and why he bought 242,000 acres of farmland. And I'll tell you, it is not good for us, okay? So I hope you have enjoyed this, and until the next time, peace and blessing and Godspeed.